Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time today. This is VR Download, and I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, broadcasting today with David Heaney in London. Some quick notes for new viewers. Myself and David Heaney meet here in each week in a studio he built to discuss the next steps of personal computing. I'm using a Quest Pro right now with face and eye tracking. And David Heaney, what are you using today?
I'm using the Quest 2 because of the issues we've reported with the Quest Pro and Quest 2 microphone. We don't want to have plosives. We want to keep it as high quality possible, the audio. So I have reverted to using a Quest 2 this week.
Yeah, and I'm using Quest Pro. I think it fits on my face better, so I don't have a mic popping issue. At least people haven't noticed it as much with mine as it has with yours, right?
It seems to be occasional with you, but it's not so much that it's deal breaking. But yeah, it's still there. It's obviously these headsets, just like comfort, the microphone is going to depend on the shape of your face and how it sits on your face. So yeah, I don't think we're to the point with your face that it's a deal breaker, but it's still there if you listen back.
Well, we've all got a global audience out there. We love seeing in our comments where people are watching us from in different places. We've got a lot of viewers across the United States, but also lots of regular viewers in different countries in Europe and around the world. We've got a big week of sort of like, I would call it, I call it different news. We've had very, very big news. You go back and look at our views on previous shows. A lot of people tuned in to see our review and our hands-on of the Quest 3. And what I would say this week is kind of like the stage is getting set for some of the next things. But it's not huge news. It's not been these major drops of new things. But David Heaney, why don't you run us through what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, as you say, it's a slower news week this week. There's not huge topics, but we still have some interesting things to discuss. We'll talk about briefly my Quest 3 charging dock review and kind of discuss, is it really worth $130? Is that convenience worth that? We'll talk about the fact that we now know the weight of Quest 3's battery and what that tells us about what could be achieved if it was moved off the visor to the back or in an external battery like Apple Vision Pro. We'll talk about Meta's CTO's comments on how the pass-through will improve, how some of those warping issues may improve in future software updates. Ian will briefly discuss his hands-on time with Asgard's Wrath 2. And at the end, we will discuss Pico. So there's some multiple pieces of news there. There's the fact that VR chat is coming soon to Pico 4. There's the fact that Pico has just improved their controller-free hand tracking again. And then obviously we will discuss those Pico rumors, the rumor that ByteDance denied that they were going to shut down. And we'll talk about maybe if there is some slither of truth to that or where we think Pico is going to go next. So some Quest news first and then some Pico news at the end.
Yeah, and I think people are hungry to hear what Pico is doing. It's like that meme of, do something, right? Like that's what people always kind of want out of other competitors in the market. And so we will discuss exactly kind of what we expect to happen there, what the rumors are, sort out what's going on there. And also, I think when we get to the Asgard's Wrath bit of discussion, it's going to actually be a really good transition to talking about what Pico is doing. So really excited to get to that bit. Why don't we just start off right here at the top with that first bit of news? With this charging dock, is it really worth $130? This is a wonderful question to ask in a headline. You explored that question with this write up. I'm using two of these docks in my house. Meta sent me one. We bought one as well. And I've got two Quests sitting on these two docks, ready to go for multiplayer VR at any given moment. And it feels absolutely liberating after years of just even if I've got two headsets, they're ready to go, and I still have software update issues, still have other kind of like problems, like the game isn't installed at all, or it's installed and it needs an update. And I've had that happen both since having these things on charging stands. So it doesn't solve all of the problems, but it's still
That's interesting.
like
for me, I haven't had that at all. It's the software.
Okay, well, to be clear, it's a multiplayer issue in general. I'm not saying on like, so yes, you can get it going here, but getting going in VR with three people in multiple locations is still a nightmare, right? Telling someone what they see in VR, getting going in it's not where it needs to be. but this improves things significantly, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was going to say, it improves actually, again, maybe I don't know why it doesn't work on your network. On mine, when I have this thing sitting in this dock, it does download all the software updates, both for the headset and all the apps. And so anytime I put it on, it's ready to go. That's obviously the case if you have it on any charger constantly, but people aren't always going to do that. That's kind of a much more awkward setup to have it constantly with a USB cable. And when we reviewed the Quest Pro, one of the things we said was just how much we loved the included charging dock and just how it feels essential for anyone that wants to regularly use VR in the same way that when you want to play your PlayStation 5 or your Xbox Series, you just pick up the controller and go. You don't have to worry, is it charged, et cetera, et cetera. Because yes, this is a portable standalone device, but I think it's pretty obvious that the way that people use this is more like a home console where you're using it in the living room or using it in your bedroom in the same location every time. So having it as just this kind of piece that's in the corner, always ready to go, it's just such a game changer compared to the old idea of having it, in a drawer or in a box somewhere where you take it out and charge it up and wait for all these updates. Because yeah, as we were kind of discussing there, how this is supposed to work now, as of a few software updates ago, is that it does download all of these updates while it's sitting on the charger. The controllers also, you no longer have to worry about controller battery. And, the thing I would also just say about this in general is it is a beautiful piece of industrial design. It does look like something straight out of an Apple product. It really is great. It feels great. The way the controllers kind of sit in here and charge wirelessly, the way the headset sits. The only issue we've noticed, well, there's two issues, but the only issue that a general user would notice is that if you're using the Elite strap, there are some angles at which it won't charge, but all you need to do to fix that is kind of just push the headset in a bit or just tilt the Elite strap back. And to be clear by angles, I'm talking about the fact that you can rotate the front box on Quest 3 just like you can on Quest 2. That's a really minor issue. The other issue for developers and people using wired link is that the USB-C cable or port here is right beside the right controller. You can kind of mitigate that by using a right-angled USB. The one criticism I would say from this hardware is the fact that you don't actually get the full charging speed out of the box. This does not come with an adapter, an actual charger, and the charging adapter that comes with your Quest 3 is only 18 watts, but this thing supports up to 45 watts if you want full fast charging of the headset and controllers. For $130 that they wouldn't include the charger, that just seems absurd. That is Apple-like again. This feels like an Apple product in multiple ways.
It's funny. So I want to sort out a few things there. I misspoke. What I wanted to talk about was I wanted to get your ideas out there of just what is this worth $130? Let's get that question answered. Is this worth $130?
No, but it's essential. So it's a really annoying situation where from Meta's perspective, this thing is probably going to increase engagement. They should be selling this a lot cheaper. I think this is essential for anyone who regularly uses their Quest 3 in the same room or area. And yet at $130, it's not priced to be an essential accessory.
Yeah, so two interesting, I like Clay, no, but I needs it. And I'm seeing people chiming in from all their locations. I saw someone saying they're in Kuwait City, Sweden, and Poland as well. Really cool to see all the different people around the world watching us, as well as the United States. All right, so two things looking at this that I'm thinking about. I've been spoiled recently where I got a MacBook with Lightning 3 on it, I think. So I've really been enjoying Lightning for the first time. Or no, sorry, Thunderbolt. I'm confusing with the Apple thing that's now dead, right? Because now USB-C has replaced the Apple connector. Thunderbolt, right? Thunderbolt 3 on a MacBook connector. A single cable bringing, I think, 100 watts of power, a huge amount of power to the laptop, and then you can daisy chain it to a whole bunch of accessories as well. It's a really, really cool system to have a single connector. Do you think there's any reason you could ever connect this dock directly to a PC using the USB cord?
Yeah, I think that is an interesting idea. It's something we discussed when Quest Pro's dock came out. It would be great if you could have another USB port here that goes into your PC, and then that handles streaming your virtual monitors for Horizon Workrooms and for the built-in remote desktop features. And ideally, even you could do something if this had, a Wi-Fi chip in it. You could have that direct connection to your headset that would avoid going through your Wi-Fi router. That could also be for Airlink. I think there's a huge potential here for Meta to do dedicated hardware for a PC connection. But as we know, the only thing they've done so far is that partnership with D-Link, which doesn't even support 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And we haven't tested it yet with Quest 3, but we plan to. It didn't support Quest Pro. It's possible it doesn't even support Quest 3.
Yeah, I think it would be cool if you could put this on the dock even and SideQuest pops open on your desktop, or the Meta obviously branded equivalent of SideQuest, and all of your videos, all of your photos that you've captured on the device are accessible, and you could even drag APKs over to it, right? And then you just pick it up off the dock and it's all good to go. So the same thing that you're talking about, updates automatically coming over the internet, you could even do from a local PC if it had that direct connection. You could do it wirelessly, I guess, but it would be nicer if it was just really fast wired.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea of having data come through this. Obviously, this is just using those 3 gold pins in the bottom of Quest 3. So for now, this is only power. But I think that is a great idea. Yeah, I think in general, it would be great if Meta did a refresh of its entire PC app. Because right now, you actually have 3 separate PC apps. You have the Oculus app, which you use for Airlink and the Rift Store. You have the MetaQuest Developer Hub app, which you use for accessing your screen recordings and screenshots and installing APKs. And obviously you can use SideQuest for that as well, but that's Meta's first party solution. And then you have a third separate app, which is the MetaQuest Remote Desktop Streamer, which is what powers Horizon Workrooms and their remote desktop solution. I don't understand why this isn't one mega app. And like you said, it could connect to some sort of dock like this.
It's just that's my long-winded way of saying that's the only explanation I can imagine why they wouldn't include like the box in the thing, is if they had some intention of you plugging this in for some use case down the road. But like in lieu of that, you're saying really should have that in the box. I'm enjoying mine, right? I had a little bit of trouble getting one of my 2 docks to set the 3 pins almost every time. It worked maybe 8 times out of 10, required a little jiggle or maybe like a tap on the side, and it would just sit in place and start charging. So it was a little annoying once in a while when I had the sort of head piece, the visor tilted this way, and that back piece tilted that way. And then it wouldn't quite sit on that. I'd have to tap it to get it to sit. But other than that, it is a really amazing addition overall to the system. And I even love these. Can you go into what this charging technology is? Because it's the Anchor dock predates this, right? The Anchor dock is a really cool addition for your Quest 2, and this is why this dock is such a huge addition to the Quest 3, is because when we got the Anchor dock for Quest 2, it almost instantly felt like this is the proper package, right? And so it's amazing to see this being added.
Yeah, we saw a lot of third-party charging docks for Quest 2, and what a lot of them did was charge your controllers through contact pin charging in the same way that the headset charges here. But the fascinating thing about this charger is that it's actually using 2 completely separate charging technologies for the headset and for the controllers. The headset, as I've mentioned, uses these 3 gold pins, which you find on the bottom of the Quest 3, but the controllers are actually using inductive wireless charging of the same kind you would use for your smartphone. So as you can see, this is what you get in the box. You get these replacement batteries that go inside your Touch Plus controllers. So, you open up your Touch Plus. Let me see if this, here we go. Yeah, inside your Touch Plus, you obviously see a battery case like this. And once you put these in, just bear with me here where we get the image up. These are replaced by that battery that comes in the box. And then you put the case over this. So it actually wirelessly charges through the plastic casing, so that the result is that the controllers look exactly as they did before, except you just place them down here. The controller charging is my favorite part of this. It just feels so seamless, so great. You cannot misplace them. You just put them anywhere near. Even if you drop them into the top here, they'll slide into place perfectly. And obviously you get the 3 LED indicators. My Quest 3 will never be off this dock, but again, it is such a shame that they're charging $130 for this thing. It just puts it out of reach. And I if they had it at $50, you just know so many more people would get it, and they would use their Quest 3 more, because having it always ready like this, it makes a dramatic difference to whether you want to use VR.
So that is going full circle to what I misspoke about at the beginning of the show, where yes, this solves the problem for you, but it doesn't solve the problem of getting you into VR with friends more quickly than before, because you have to have the friends have the game installed, have their system charged up. And the problem I was having was some of the best content, the content I love, or that would get people to come back to a headset that tried it a couple of years ago, is a lot of the DLC content. And so you sometimes have to buy the DLC content on multiple systems. And in my case, I've got two headsets logged in to the same two accounts, but they both need to have access to the DLC content for us both to go in, with a third remote person joining us and us all getting into the same bit of content together. And so you've got to have, you know, you've all got to have access to the content, you've all got to be charged, and you've all got to have your system updated. And you're asking for basically this. Ideally, this would be the bare minimum for everyone involved, right? Is, I guess, where we're going. I wish everyone had this as the minimum package, because it would mean that when I call them up to say, let's go into VR, they're ready to go, just like I am.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wish that this was in the box with Quest 3. I understand why it isn't, but I wish it was. And it's just a really tough situation. That, yeah, as you say,
Onikaze, that's par for the course with a lot of DLC on Flat 2. That's true. It is, and I like that, because I am specifically talking about my favorite games out there. But it's a little bit harder when you have to go through the whole process of going into a headset versus just launching a game and then realizing you don't have the same pack, right? There's a huge investment of multiple people in time to align schedules and get everyone into a headset. And then when you do all of that and it doesn't work, it bruises your love for VR for a little while, right? Like I don't want to expend that time again until everyone is, ready to go.
Yeah. Should we talk about the next piece of news, the Quest 3's battery?
Yeah, and I saw, we'll talk about it next week. There was just a update put out by Meta on their newest release. We'll get into that next week. And there is one interesting setting in there that will relate to battery life. So stay tuned for that next week. Look on UploadVR.com as we get into that. But let's talk about Quest 3's battery. You have been following the situation with Quest 3's battery all along, right? David Heaney did our review, of course. If you listen to our recent upload podcasts, he did a hands-on, I did a hands-on, then he lived with it for a week. And the battery's location on your face changes. The battery used to be out further, now it's up close to your face, and the weight changes. It's hard for people to wrap their head around how this feels lighter without changing a lot in terms of literal grams on your face, right? So walk us through how to think about the weight of this unit on your face, because other products out there are coming up with other solutions to where to put this weight, and we're going to keep an eye on those designs over the next couple of years, aren't we?
Yeah, it is one of the big debates in this space. And if you remember last week's show, if you were watching then, we talked about the fact that iFixit did a teardown of Quest 3, and you can see an image of this here. And what they found was that the battery takes up this huge portion of the visor when you remove the front plate. And so that led to a lot of assumptions that the battery must make up a huge percentage of the weight. And obviously, we know that headsets like Quest Pro and Pico 4 have that battery in the rear. Headsets like Apple Vision Pro take the battery completely off your head and into a battery pack. But we asked the person at iFixit who did the teardown to weigh that battery, because I was really curious. What is the actual number? And so the answer is surprising. It's 64 grams. That's nowhere near as much as a lot of people would have assumed, because you'll know from our review that we weighed Quest 3 without the facial interface and straps and found that it weighs 397 grams when you take off the facial interface and the straps. So just the visor and the speaker and strap arms. That means that the battery only actually makes up 16% of that weight. And so you could argue that, these strap arms with speakers should be factored in. And so let's say you took those off. The battery is still only going to be somewhere on the order of 20 or 25% of the weight. So if you removed the battery from the front and you put it in the rear, or you put it on an external battery pack, you're not going to get a Quest 3 that is half as light. You're not going to get a Quest 3 that is a third as light. You're going to get a Quest 3 that is 80% the same weight. That's, again, counterintuitive to what people may have expected. There is this kind of hope that of a magical solution of, oh, these headsets will get lighter as soon as you take the battery out. Yes, they'll get lighter, but not dramatically so. You can argue about whether 20% is dramatic, but it wouldn't be anything on the order of 50 or 60 or 70 or 80% or anything like that.
Yeah, the person that comes to mind when we get into this discussion is always Roni Abowitz in my mind. That's the former CEO of Magic Leap. And Magic Leap, of course, debuted this design for its Magic Leap 1 AR glasses, and the Magic Leap 2 follows suit, where the processor and the battery pack are all contained in this unit that's, I don't know, yay big. It's, softball size, I guess. A little bit flatter than that, so you can actually fit it into a strap and put it on your side and wear that with a wire going up to your headset. So removing a large amount of weight from that design in order to get you a more comfortable, longer wearable. Apple's device doesn't do that. Apple Vision Pro is going to keep a bunch of the processing still on your head and only move the battery down here. Weight on your face is miserable. At summer months, one of the things that I'm curious about watching over the years it is one of the reasons people use their Quest so much at Christmas time because it's colder and it's not so darn hot as it is in summer. Like what do the usage hours look like in the summer months of VR versus the winter months of VR? Because heat is that much of an issue for usage. I don't want to be dripping sweat unless it's for a specific exercise purpose. Battery, processing, heat, all of that on your face relates to that in a very big way. And so 16% is an interesting number to keep in mind as far as how much weight you could remove from this area. But not as much as you've removed half by maybe taking a bunch of the stuff away like you see with the Big Screen Beyond headset, right?
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned, the way that you could take a huge portion of the weight out would be to move the compute as well. And Magic Leap 2 is a great example of that. It's one of the only examples of that. But some people envision that this would be moved out to a little puck the size of a phone that you can fit in your pocket. And the reality is, if you look at these headsets and you look at the compute and the giant fans relative to the headset that are cooling that down, you can't do that with a phone. A phone, yes, has the same kind of chip, but it doesn't have a battery as big and it doesn't have the cooling fans. The difference between a smartphone, even a smartphone that uses the same kind of chip at a VR headset, and the headset, is that the headset is running at sustained peak performance for hours on end. A smartphone will if you try to run a VR game like Red Matter 2 on a smartphone, it would thermal throttle after about 5 or 15 minutes, and then it would have to reduce the GPU over and over again until the dynamic resolution went lower and lower and lower. That's why if you want to put the compute into a puck, it ends up being something like this, something that doesn't fit in your pocket but straps to your body. And that's a trade-off that some people may be comfortable to make. For Magic Leap's enterprise use case, it is something that's they're comfortable to make because this isn't a consumer thing where you're worried about friction. This is something that people are putting on for their job. But I'm very, very skeptical that this would ever be a consumer friendly thing, that people would want to put something this size and strap it on with essentially a car belt around themselves and to a thick cable that goes up to the headset.
I'm game. I'm down. I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this specifically for Pokemon Go. I want this to play Pokemon Go out in a park. I want to throw actual Pokeballs out there. I want to do a real battle. I think this battery pack is what's going to enable that gameplay experience. I don't see a route to having that much. If I need dynamic occlusion in my surroundings for 45 minutes or an hour at a time in order to have a really great multiplayer gaming experience, I think it's going to maybe need power like that. I could be wrong. correct me. Someone show me a different path.
I think
But
there'll be a
like,
battery, but it's move. I think the limit's always going to be for these companies what will fit in your pocket. And if you look at the Vision Pro battery, so to be clear to everyone that isn't aware, the Vision Pro has the computing in the headset, but the battery in this puck, it looks like it was designed to be the largest object that would fit in your pocket. And this is maybe a slightly irrelevant tangent, but I always remember Steve Jobs designing the iPods, or directing the design of the iPods to fit part of your pocket, the original one to fit in a pocket. Literally, that was the design goal, to fit in a standard pocket. And then was it the iPod Nano that was designed to fit in that little whatever you call it, compartment of your pocket, the small little
oh,
one that Steve Jobs, no, the little in your jeans pocket, the little thing. I think he joked about. Does anyone actually know what
the
this is
coin
for?
pocket or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Yeah, got
yeah.
it.
And
Yeah.
he said on stage, here's what it's for. It's for the iPod Nano, or whichever model it was. And, that was great. I think that's going to be the limit for consumer devices. What fits in a standard person's pocket? I think you're going to be able to get battery in that. And I agree with you. For AR glasses, it seems like a very, very possible path that to get to all day battery, you'll have to put this thing in your pocket. But once it gets too big to fit in your pocket, you lose so many consumers.
It would have to be more, if it's the vast majority of women's clothing that doesn't come with pockets, and then some men's clothing that doesn't come with pockets, you would have a majority of clothing that doesn't come with pockets, right? And that's why it's presented in this hanging form factor, where you strap it on separate to a pocket. But I see the valid point. It's a really hard use case. We've seen these. What do you think of the usability of these pocket AI cameras with projectors that you supposedly go into your hand? Like, that seems way more absurd to me as a usability idea than what we're discussing right here. But time will tell on exactly how this wins out. I think it's time to move on to this next subject with Meta, and then we will talk about my Asgard's Wrath time, and then we will transition to the big Pico discussion. Of course, thank you everyone for tuning in. We have had some exclusive reporting about Pico on UploadVR.com, and I think our discussion on here is going to be pretty nuanced in a way that you're not going to find elsewhere. So yes, please also just share this link out and consider becoming a member. Thank you so much for giving us your time, as always. But if you can do anything else to help us out, we'd always appreciate it. David, let's talk about Meta CTO, Andrew Bosworth, and what he said about the pass-through on the Quest 3.
Yeah, so anyone who's been here for the past few shows, if you've read our Quest 3 review, you'll know that while we have praised the good aspects of Quest 3's color real-world pass-through, the fact that it has very low latency, the fact that at medium and long ranges, it's depth correct and scale correct, and we've acknowledged that it is the first pass-through on a consumer headset that you would want to spend more than a few minutes in. You're not going to love it, but you're not going to hate it, is the way I put it last week. But we also pointed out that there are significant flaws in the near field at close range, where you will see this geometric distortion on your hands, on your phone. You'll see this double imaging when you're moving your arm, or again, your phone, or any moving object near you. And these things really do detract from the experience. And just as much as the graininess, they remind you that this is nothing like a transparent optic. So Meta's CTO has come out yesterday in an Ask Me Anything session and said that it will improve over time, but the caveat word he used was modestly. It will improve modestly over time. Now, I take that to be tempering expectations in saying that these issues that we're talking about, this warping, this distortion, this double imaging, it's going to get better, but it's not going to magically be fixed. So people who are pessimistically saying, oh, it's never going to get any better, they're wrong. But people who are also saying, oh, I'm sure Meta will fix this with a software update, this is not a this is going to get fixed situation. This is it will improve situation.
Yeah, obviously a lot of expectations to set there in different places, right? There's people who do have expectations of it improving, but it's not going to close that 7x gap that everyone in our comments will discuss between what's possible on $500 hardware and what's going to be possible on the $3,500 Apple Vision Pro when it ships next year. I saw a comment right at the beginning of the show about the Vive XR Elite, resurrecting that from the recesses of my brain from earlier in this year. I forgot that HTC launched a new device. Did that happen this year, David? Do you have this headset, don't you?
Yes, and it's just been so far down. We really still do plan to review it, but it's just been so far down our priorities. There's been so little news about it. I've seen very few people care about it. It seems to be, it seems to have had very little attention or care because, it arrived just around the same time that Quest Pro got cut from 1,500 to 1,000, while it sold at $1,100. I think the question was maybe about the pass through, and I can
Well, Passer on it, and it's also got a split design too, doesn't it? Isn't it? It's also different. It's on that scale of separating the battery pack from the headset, right?
Yeah. So one of the things I actually love about XR Elite, the one thing I love about the XR Elite is that it has a choose your own split design.
They can put that one. They can put that one on the poster. The one thing you like about the 5XR Elite.
All right. Yeah, so it's a very clever design. What they do is they let you have it in the back padding, like Pico 4 and Quest Pro, but you can also detach the back padding and bring it down like an Apple Vision Pro style battery. So the reason you would do that is if you want to sit down and lean back on a couch or on a bed, you don't have to have the back padding there anymore. I think that's a genius design. It's really clever. Props to HTC for that. It's, in my opinion, the ideal way to do this, that you have the battery on the back or down by your side, depending on your use case. On the back for room scale, down by your side for seated. I would love to see other companies adopt that. But to answer the question about their pass-through, the Pico 4 and XR Elite pass-through is not depth and scale correct. I get sick in either of them after maybe a minute. If so, sometimes I would get sick after 30 seconds in them. They are clearly designed for setup. I understand HTC kind of also markets theirs for mixed reality. I would not want to use their pass-through for mixed reality. The only company in the consumer standalone space that's shipping right now that has depth and scale correct pass-through is Meta. The reason that you see these warping issues on Quest 3 and Quest Pro is that is the trade-off to achieve depth and scale correct pass-through. They do this system of estimating the depth of the entire visual field and then reprojecting the camera views. And that is the way that you get depth correct pass-through. But it has these harsh trade-offs. It has this distortion in the near field. It has this double imaging effect. Quest 3 is getting there. And I imagine if Meta keeps pushing this approach with more powerful processors, with better sensors, with better algorithms, it's not going to be long until they get something that solves these issues. But it's not going to happen in Quest 3. It's going to be Quest Pro 2 or Quest 4 or somewhere like that.
Yeah, there is. I'm really glad we finally got to talk about the 5XR Elite. It's I don't know. It's funny when you get a headset thinking that people are interested in it, and then you realize after getting it that nobody really cares, right? Like that's essentially what happened on our side, and yeah, there's still people out there that want to review it and are curious about it, but ultimately it's not the right mix of things to interest the consumers that's going to move the needle in any significant way, right? And we're talking, and here we are recommending our viewers, rabid viewers, many of them owning Quest 2 presently, and we're recommending people don't even go out and buy the last generation leading headset. That's how tricky of a market we're in right now.
Yeah, I think the problem with 5XR Elite is that the store is just not competitive. It's a Quest Pro competitor, but why would you buy the Quest Pro competitor that has a tiny fraction of the content? If I had to guess off the top of my head, 15% of what's in the Quest store. What Pico has actually done really well with their store is that they've actually gone out there and paid developers to port their content. Pico's store has a remarkable percentage of the Quest store, except for the exclusives, of course. But I think a lot of people underestimate just how much is on the Pico store now. We'll talk about that later when we talk about Pico 4. But HTC wasn't able to do that for obvious reasons because their thing was priced so much higher. And maybe they do have this first party software, but at the other time they have this other headset, Focus 3, which is more optimally designed for business use cases. It's just one of the situations where HTC probably should have kept with their original plan all the way back in 2018, which was to partner with Google. If you remember, not many people remember this, but HTC was originally supposed to be to release the first ever Daydream standalone headset. It was supposed to be HTC and Lenovo. And so halfway through that project, HTC decided, no, we want the software profits too. We don't just want to be the hardware profits. And they decided to make their own Vive mobile platform. I suspect had they stuck with Google, Google could have had the war chest to fund content to compete with Meta, but they didn't. And so HTC is still trying to run this third store. You have the Quest store is way out and ahead as the greatest content in standalone. The Quest store is obviously, you know, in quantity and quality, it beats any other standalone headset. Then you have Pico as second, and then you have a distant third with HTC, and that's the problem with that headset more than the hardware itself.
All right, I'm back. Well, I had to get my device charging. I'm down to 15%. Hopefully, it actually starts going upward here. I think it's time to talk about Asgard's Wrath 2 and what it says about the VR market. This is not our Gamescast show, right? We talk about industry trends. We talk at a very high level, trying to understand where everything is going. And we're still trying to figure out a way to bring back our games commentary and analysis back to video format. It's very, very hard to figure out where we're going to, how we're going to do that right, right? We want to make sure we do it the right way. But Asgard's Wrath 2, I went there late last week and I tried it out. And you can go read my hands-on, you can see all the things I did in it. I don't want to focus on too many of those things. I tried a whole bunch of methods of traversal. There's wall running, there's flying. You can basically be held by one creature and fly underneath it. You can ride on the back of a cat across the desert. But every moment inside this world, you get a sense of just how much money was spent on the assets and the depth of this world. This is probably one of the biggest budget VR projects ever to be attempted. And it's built for standalone VR first and only, right? This is Asgard's Wrath 2 is going to run on Quest 2 and Quest 3. You can also go and see Henry's write-up of Assassin's Creed. So Assassin's Creed is coming out for Quest systems in mid-November. Asgard's Wrath 2 is coming out for Quest systems in mid-December. And between them, you've got a 1-2 punch of just an absurd amount of money spent on standalone VR content. And you feel it in all of the interactions inside of Asgard's Wrath 2, whether it's doing all of the different, whether it's doing all of the different activities, but like even from the first moments we're interacting with this bird is animated to a degree that you don't quite like see as beautiful as that in a Quest system. So I'm drawn in every moment that you're in this world. You feel like it has more depth to it. Like there's this moment in this game where I'm standing in solving this puzzle in one place, and the sun is coming down. It's a hot desert, and I can feel like the desert is on the other side of the walls near where I'm interacting. That is the result of just the amount of content they've put in this world. And it's going to be a fascinating thing. If you rewind the calendar a little bit, back in 2019, Asgard's Wrath 1 came out for the Rift system, Rift S and Rift, and it was a huge push forward for production values in VR in general. It was the most ambitious game to that time ever released for a VR headset. And then Sanzaru, the developer of Asgard's Wrath, got purchased by Facebook. Facebook is obviously now Meta. And for the last, 4 years now, they've been toiling away at a sequel here and building it for standalone VR. So for a couple of years now, Meta has been criticized for where are the games. And these two games aren't going to get rid of the complaint that where is Grand Theft Auto, right? People are still wondering where one of the biggest games on the planet is on a Quest system. But these two games Asgard's Wrath and Assassin's Creed answer some of gamers' complaints over the last few years of the Quest ecosystem. And before we switch to this last section of our discussion and we talk about Pico things, I really wanted to just make sure people understand that this is like, we're going to review this. We're going to give Asgard's Wrath another hands-on assessment as soon as we can. But this is the real deal when it comes to production values and putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to like funding content from the ground up for VR. Meta has shown up in a very real way and paid some very skilled artists a lot of money to make this game a reality. And that has going to be no bearing on whether this is going to be an enjoyable 60 hours to spend in VR. That's what they've pitched Asgard's Wrath 2 as having 60 or more hours of gameplay. A large part of this game is you galloping across the desert, this barren desert. There's things around the desert. Are people going to enjoy that for 60 hours? We don't know. You're going to have to come back to us in December for our review. Let us get into this more in depth and our hands on. But above that level, right, the level that matters on this show when we talk about industry trends is compare the amount of money spent on these two titles, Assassin's Creed and Asgard's Wrath 2, and I'd be willing to bet money that it would dwarf the entire budget that Pico has spent on anything, right? I can imagine just between them, these two titles alone, it would be larger than anything Pico has done. And before we go into the Pico discussion, we need to say that, right? It's fair to the effort to acknowledge that this is truly big budget VR content in standalone form factor.
Yeah, exactly. This is what VR gamers have been asking for. Well, standalone VR gamers have been asking for. They've been asking for big, meaty titles that have dozens of hours of gameplay and deep story and combat and single player worlds with voice acting and high production value made by real gaming studios. Real games, not mini games. I think what'll be interesting to see is let's find out if what people say they want is what they want. Will people buy Assassin's Creed Nexus and Asgard's Wrath 2? Will enough people buy it to cover the development costs? Because that will inform what Meta does next. They are a data-driven company. If people go out and buy this and they actually play it and they recommend it to their friends and they play it and this is what Quest gamers really want, expect to see more like this in future. Expect to see Meta take a Sony-like strategy of always trying to release their headsets with big games like these coming. But on the other hand, if they find out that people don't really want to pony up the, I think it's $60, is it for this, or $50?
I forget. It did look like I think it's full price. Yeah.
Yeah, these are, it's the same thing with Assassin's Creed. We're talking about somewhere between $40 and $60. We don't know exactly where, but somewhere between that. If people really don't want to pay that and they decide, you know what, I'm actually just going to go and play Rec Room and Beat Saber and Population 1 and the free or cheap titles, Meta will eventually stop investing in this, or they will only invest in these titles rarely to bring in new people. Because again, what a lot of these titles are designed to do also, as well as get current Quest owners to buy these games, is to bring in new Quest owners. We know that was the strategy with the Resident Evil 4, for example, where it was bundled and it really moved Quest headset sales that winter. But yeah, it'll be fascinating to see, is this really what people want, or is it just what they say they want?
Yeah, we have a stupid comment here from Nexus, and then an okay comment where they're saying wait for reviews. Yes, wait for reviews. That's always our motto here. Wait for reviews. We don't. The stupid comment there that I'm just going to allude to is Asgard's Wrath 2 is free with the purchase of every Quest headset that you buy through January. So whether you wait for reviews or not, if you're in the market for a Quest 3, you're going to probably install this and check it out. So yes, we're going to do that assessment for people who are Quest 2 owners, and we tried it out on Quest 3. So there's absolutely no telling what the performance feels like on a Quest 2 until we put our eyes in it and feel for ourselves how this massive game runs on the last gen system. What I saw, obviously, running on Quest 3 was a very smooth experience overall. Um, but that's the bigger thing there to address in saying that this is bundled with the headset is we haven't heard any indications of whether Assassin's Creed is going to be bundled yet. But Meta has the Quest Plus program, which they're frequently pulling games from their library, the best games from their library, and making it available for you if you go and get this bundle. And then they're bundling, obviously, the Quest Plus program with the purchase of the headset. I think if you get the higher end Quest 3, right?
Yeah, the 512 gig storage. I think, yeah, it's possible we could see an Assassin's Creed bundle that you pay a little extra for, but it's cheaper than buying the game. It's also possible that maybe when that rumored Quest 3 Lite that we were talking about last episode comes out, maybe that might be bundled. It also is an opportunity for next year. You know, we've seen the Meta do that with Resident Evil 4 and such. We've seen it in the past with Robo Recall and some other titles. Yeah, it'll be they clearly have games now that are they're going to have these games that, while we haven't reviewed them yet, from a content scope and budget, they are on the same level as what people expect from full-blown gaming consoles. Obviously, though, as you say, we haven't reviewed this yet. We don't know. Maybe these games are terrible. We don't know yet. But
Yeah.
it doesn't seem likely that they're terrible.
Oh yeah, and so all right, so then we go to the sort of investment issue of like just what do gamers want? And that's what I wanted to focus on in talking about whether they bundle Assassin's Creed or not. Like they could bundle Assassin's Creed or not, doesn't really matter. What matters is the one thing you said about Meta making its funding decisions going forward based on how these perform. And if you opt in to Meta taking additional analytics from you over, when you set up your system, there's an option to give Meta additional analytics. They should be able to tell how many hours you spend in these respective games. And that will determine how they spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars. Will they spend it making their internal first party teams like Sanzaru Games bigger and make them make further games, or will they go throw it at studios like Ubisoft or Rockstar, the developer, the people who own a Grand Theft Auto? Do they throw it at those studios? Who do they give money at for the next round of gaming for the Quest 3, Quest 4, and beyond?
To say something totally out there, I think if you look at how much Meta has partnered with Ubisoft over the past era of VR, I suspect that if Meta was not in its current regulatory climate, it would do what Microsoft is doing and just buy Ubisoft. It would be such an obvious play, but I don't think it's actually something they can do in the current regulatory climate. I would go as far as to say Meta seems to be required to play by slightly different rules than others, based on, they try to acquire a small fitness app and they get more scrutiny than Microsoft acquiring half of the gaming industry. But
And
yeah, that is where it is.
I'm going to walk, I'm going to take this headset off and then go right at my window here, a story about Meta bundling Supernatural at a new price with headsets. And all I'm saying, like what I'm trying to get here is, and James O'Loughlin in our comments saying, what is it? Engagement data driven content. Yay. I like that question because it is fundamentally how Meta does things. They look at the data and they make their decisions based on that data. And it's almost like how you get good art out of a process that's data driven is a question very few companies have an answer for. And we're going to see whether several years of top tier payments to artists at Meta results in a quality experience here, or whether they have to have a different solution, like David Heaney is talking about, given their situation. But I think that's great context to now transition into Pico, right? We've established the scale of the investment out of Meta, and now we're going to talk about where Pico is and where Pico might be in the near future.
Yeah, let's start by just covering the two pieces of Pico news, and then we can go in to talk about those rumors. So, yeah, the first piece of news is that VR chat is coming to Pico 4. This appeared on the Pico 4 store, is coming soon. We reached out to VR chat and got confirmation that it is not an error. VR chat is coming to Pico 4. Obviously, if you have a gaming PC, you can use your Pico 4 via virtual desktop or the built-in streaming. That's already possible. This news refers to it coming to the standalone store. So people who do not own a gaming PC, as long as they have a Pico 4, they can join. Now, obviously, this would not. You need to be familiar with the way that VR chat fragments its content between PC and mobile. So VR chat is already on Quest and it's already on Android phones as an alpha test. And how this works is that creators can either publish high fidelity content that only runs on a PC, and in that case, Quest and mobile and soon Pico 4 owners cannot join that. But what they have the other option to upload standalone mobile versions of their content alongside the PC one, so that PC owners and Quest owners and Android phones and Pico 4 can all play in the same world. And sort of one of the criticisms I have about a lot of the promotion of VR chat by its fans is that sometimes they show off the PC only content as if it should be compared directly to standalone content. And yeah, these are actually two very different things. You could argue that there are two VR chats within VR chat. To be clear, Pico 4 would be accessing this mobile content. But still, that's a great thing that people who own that headset and don't own a PC will be able to join what is still the leading social VR platform.
Now, of course, we will be really curious to see how VR chat moderation is handled over time. What sort of content doesn't make it into mainland China, right? So existing developers have had to maintain a completely separate server for any multiplayer components that they put into their China-based version of the game. And VR chat is this, what to some people it's this vision of borderless, faceless, show up as you are and do whatever you want utopia in some people's heads. And it's going to fly in the face of some censors, I would imagine, in some countries.
We don't have confirmation that it is coming to the Chinese store. So to be clear, there are two Pico stores. There's the China one and the non-China one. We don't have access to the China one. We can't really do any serious reporting on that. We only have access to the outside China. Obviously, everyone's familiar of the fact that the way the Chinese internet is set up, it's designed to be only barely accessible to outsiders, and obviously vice versa, for it to be very, very difficult for Chinese citizens without a VPN to access the rest of the world. All we know is that it's coming to the Western store. We will reach out and ask if it's coming to the Chinese store. It's an interesting question, but we don't know for now.
I'm glad we made that clarification now, right? There are many games that don't, right? They just released for the global audience. But what gets me about that, David, is the very real situation where people just say they're out of the country in order to get access to the games they want, right? And again, we haven't actually done this ourselves, and we're not Chinese citizens, so we don't know what sort of laws we would be breaking to go and do that, to misrepresent our online persona and go and get a game from the global audience category rather than the firewalled category, or even if it was even possible, right? Even if I could get that content through the firewall, even if I went through those extra steps. Point being, right, VPNs are a very popular thing for a lot of people in a lot of places. And what border, what place you physically reside in doesn't necessarily keep you from the content you want to get to. And I'm curious what happens with VR chat overall in getting into those places. It's a completely different it's a very different place, right? Like it's a different uh I don't know. I can imagine a lot of people trying to get VR chat inside China, even when they can't legally do it or can't go do it on the store.
Yeah, I think I've heard of people doing that on the Steam version. Obviously, yes, Steam itself has a separate version within China. The Nintendo Switch, if you buy it in China, Tencent handles the content there. We saw reports over the past year that Meta plans to expand Quest into China, and again, they would be partnering with Tencent to do this separate content thing. Yeah, it's a very confusing situation. Should we just quickly?
GT saying your reporters break rules all the time. Yeah, I get it. But we would need to go physically to China to test some of these things or have someone partner with us inside China at great personal risk to themselves. So that's something we would have to consider long term if we really wanted to get into some of these larger issues as we go in. But yeah, let's get into the next thing, David.
Yeah, so the other news is that Pico 4 has again had a software update to improve its controller free hand tracking. If you watched this show back in August, we talked about the major update to their hand tracking that reduced the jitter and improved the accuracy and reliability. So now there's another update this week that lowers the latency and improves tracking when the hands are overlapping. So I tried this out. There was also a note in the changelog, which I wasn't able to try, obviously, but it said that they have enhanced the reliability for darker skin tones. And that's great to hear, obviously, so that more people are able to use this technology. So I tried it. It's still not as good as Quest's hand tracking. They have really come a long way. It was pretty terrible when Pico 4 first launched. It was an experimental option to use their hand tracking. It's getting better with every update, but there's still a huge gulf between it and Quest hand tracking. For example, fast motions that I'm able to track right now, those just do not work at all on Pico's hand tracking. There's also, it doesn't work in the same level of lighting. It requires much better lighting. I imagine Pico with a year or two of constant hard work could maybe catch up, but for now there is that gulf, which is fascinating because maybe you want to talk about the exclusive reporting that you did last month about this.
Yeah, so we have some exclusive reporting on UploadVR.com. I suppose you search Pico hand tracking, UploadVR.com, you should find it. But essentially, we've got indications that Pico is switching its focus from controllers to hand tracking in response to the fact that the Apple Vision Pro is clearly embracing hand tracking from the ground up. Now, uh, what form that takes or how it actually expresses itself in a product package people can go and buy is something we have no idea. We don't know where it's going to land. We don't even know where Meta is going to land on the question of including controllers in the box or selling a headset without the controllers. I even thought about it this morning. Like it's probably on the minds of a lot of our viewers. The obsessed people who want to know what the next thing is have to be wondering whether the controllers are going to be included in the box. And like I imagined, okay, let's go buy the next Quest and let's just give an option after you buy it to remove the controllers if you really want. And then do give people a pop-up that says you can't play all these great games if you remove the controllers from the box. Meta has told us they don't want to do that. They want people to feel like they've got a great value and they've got all access to all the great games. Here's Pico. And they are looking a couple of years out into the future and saying, how do we differentiate ourselves from Apple? How do we differentiate ourselves from Meta? And how do we make a market for ourselves on our own? And I don't know that they do that by switching to hand tracking, even though by all indications, we've got them on the record, ByteDance telling us that, like Meta, they expect hand tracking to be supported at the very least, and then controllers are more or less the optional thing going forward, right? So that's a big shift, and it causes a lot of scary scenarios for devs that either don't have the money to support hand tracking or their game just really isn't a good fit for it. What does the next few years of their market options look like if they have to make a change here?
Yeah, so let's talk about how this may relate to the rumor that came out this week. So, this Chinese news outlet, Equal Ocean, reported that ByteDance was going to gradually shut down Pico over time. ByteDance being the Chinese parent company of Pico, and interestingly, the same company behind TikTok, in case you didn't know that. So, ByteDance came out and denied this. They told China's Financial Associated Press that the rumor is untrue, direct untrue. They gave this quote: Pico is operating normally and the company will invest in its XR business in the long term. To be clear, that is a translated quote, but I don't think you're missing any meaning there. It's pretty clear exactly what they just said. So you then have this rumor. We have the fact that they are changing their focus to hand tracking, and the general expectation, and what I've heard as well, is that they are looking to follow Apple Vision Pro. This is something that is not surprising. If you look at Chinese tech companies, if you open Xiaomi or OnePlus or Huawei's Android phone interface, in many cases, it's a direct, shameless copy of iOS. If you look at a lot of their marketing materials, a direct copy of iOS. If you look at companies like Xiaomi, they make watches that are designed to look as much like the Apple Watch as possible. You do have this culture in these Chinese consumer tech companies to, instead of forge their own path, to just kind of copy what Apple is doing. And so that seems like it could be what Pico is doing. Their plan here could be to get as many developers and as much of their content to move to hand tracking as step one. And then step two, they release a better headset that is more designed around hand tracking with a higher price, that also takes Apple's approach of bringing 2D apps into a spatial interface. They could either do that through, web apps, or they could try and bring Android store apps. That's obviously a huge challenge, because without Google Play, you're going to have a big challenge convincing developers to come over. That's the open question to me. How they would do that is questionable. Perhaps they could leverage the TikTok partnership and focus on just letting you watch TikTok videos, but I think it would have to be something a lot more substantial than that.
Yeah, let's see. Wabo's saying Pico would have even farther to go with hand tracking than Meta. Not sure if that's realistic. I think that is a fantastically insightful comment that describes really core the issue here. HTC was given a lot of credit where maybe it wasn't due for their efforts in the consumer market over the last 5 years. They did HTC Vive in 2016 and then kind of just had a bunch of lackluster efforts comparatively to everything else in the market. Here we go with Pico, and what we're discussing with Meta is how does Meta build? There was another comment, several up, saying, "I will eat my hat if Meta ships a Quest without controllers in the next 3 generations." That's why we spend such a ridiculous, stupid amount of time on the show discussing the naming conventions of these technologies. Because at the end of the day, Meta wants to ship a sleeker, smaller box. Maybe that requires the name change. Maybe it's just a version of the existing machine. We don't know. But the end is there, and they're the only ones besides Apple investing at the speed necessary to make this technology really usable. And that's what that other comment is getting at.
So yes, Pico has a long way to go with hand tracking if they're using this same sensor architecture, but they could use a sensor architecture designed for hands. They could put an actual real time of flight depth sensor in there. So this is one of the things I wanted to talk about this week. The difference between different types of what people very vaguely call depth sensors. So Quest 3 does not technically have a depth sensor. It has a depth projector. And what it does is just projects a matrix of IR dots, infrared dots. And then by looking at how that matrix appears and distorts, they can then determine what is the shape of the geometry I'm seeing in front of me. That's how they do the room scanning, for example. That depth sensor is not used for the depth estimation that is used for Passthrough, that depth projector. It is not used for hand tracking at the moment. It may be used in low light to illuminate the hands, but it's not actually used as part of the hand tracking estimation. If you look at very, very expensive headsets like HoloLens 2 in the past, they have an actual time of flight sensor. And so what a time of flight sensor does is that it sends out light and then the light bounces back to the headset, and a sensor on the headset measures the change in wavelength, and from that it can determine the distance. It's somewhat similar to radar, but with light instead of radio waves. That's not what's on Quest 3, but it's conceivable that Pico could design a headset that uses a proper time of flight sensor to track your hands. We don't know if that's going to happen, but if they really were going to go all in and chase after Vision Pro, they could charge a higher price. If Vision Pro is $3,500, all Pico needs to do to be, to use a kind of disparaging term, the Chinese knockoff of Vision Pro, is release at something like $1,000, and they are not dollars because they're not in North America, but €1,000, and then there you go. People who want that same experience get it for less than a third of the price. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do, but it's a very, very possible path that they just decide, why would we compete with Meta and spend all of this money on games and try to sell subsidized hardware at €400 when we can just go and compete with Vision Pro and do the type of use case that we were talking about last week, just putting virtual monitors in your space, letting you have a YouTube video while you have another thing alongside here, while you have an AR app on your table. That's the use case that they can chase after if they're chasing after Apple.
Yeah. Okay. And all right. So then we get to the core of this issue, right? How I can't imagine that being a good experience with a Pico headset. It's not a good experience with a Meta headset today. It's a painful experience with a Meta headset. We've got videos we put out on our we've covered them of people hanging YouTube videos to do a recipe or do the dishes while watching YouTube. And, they can interact with open air hand tracking, which is really cool while having their hands unavailable to them. That's a really, really cool idea that's still largely conceptual. You're not really wanting to do that for huge lengths of time. And one of the reasons you don't is because the user interface for interacting with these windows is not ideal. Apple Vision Pro has a much improved interface, at least from what I saw in a few minutes with it, with that hand and eye tracking. But then you're talking about more hardware stuff. Yeah. All right. So here's where I'm going with this. All right. Like that's all right. Step one. Like they've already shipped a better package than Meta at a competitive price, and they still failed because they couldn't put it in the same countries as Meta, and they couldn't put the same amount of content, exclusive content, on their system as Meta. So you reviewed it, you tested it. It's a better headset overall in many ways, but you still can't recommend the package. How could they go even further down the rabbit hole of like, let's now mimic a whole nother ecosystem and shove in 10 okay apps or good apps, but give nobody 15, we're talking on Meta's end about Meta potentially hitting a dead end in mixed reality and hand tracking for the near future, at least with mixed reality. How can Pico hope to salvage this with something like I appreciate you saying, what if they shipped this piece of hardware, this piece of hardware, and this piece of hardware? I get it. I like to imagine what if they did that too, but it's not going to work unless they have $1 billion to spend on games too.
Well, but the games people aren't buying Vision Pro for games. That's not the pitch. It's a completely different kind of product in terms of the pitch. So let me just explain. Okay. If they're trying to compete with Vision Pro, not Quest, I think a lot of people still haven't wrapped their head around the fact that Vision Pro is not a direct Quest competitor. It doesn't matter if it doesn't have Population 1 and Breachers and all of these games. In fact, it's not going to have Asgard's Wrath 2. Vision Pro is not going to have Assassin's Creed Nexus, but it doesn't matter. With an AR first strategy like Vision Pro, the content matters less because the content that you're using is the same traditional content that you watch on your phone and on your tablet. All they need is a YouTube app, a Netflix app, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, and you're ready to go. That's what people want of these kind of headsets.
I will. So what I'm saying is I don't believe, I am very skeptical that Pico has the in-house software expertise to make that a compelling offer. Now, if they go and buy a company like Immersed, I will change my mind, right? Like that's what I think they're missing in order to make what you're describing a something people would actually want to go and buy.
So Pico has been poaching a lot of software engineers from Meta. If you know this, there are a lot of Meta engineers who've moved over to Pico. It's if they're using their Chinese onshore engineers, they have a lot of talent there. This is a country where what's the statistic that more engineers graduate every year in China than exist in the entire United States? Not graduate but exist. So they do have this talent pool. The reason that they're able to move so fast is the same way that Chinese Android phones can have all these features. They don't do the design. They just copy the existing design of the Western companies and re-implement it. They don't have to do any of the hard work. All they have to do is look at what Apple does. And I imagine if Pico follows Apple, it will look like Vision OS. It will be a shameless copy, and they will get away with it because, Apple's not going to try and cause a dispute that has any consequences for their Chinese suppliers. That Apple's going to say, as long as you stay out of our turf, as long as you're only this problem over in Europe and in Asia, we don't really care that much, because Pico's not going to arrive in the US turf under the current political climate. So as long as they're not on Apple's turf, Apple's not probably going to care.
So why don't you look at the comments there as we move towards the end of the show here? I think we'll, if you've got any last minute comments, we'll get into them and reply to them. There was this question here from, let's see where it is, Sirius. How hard is the algorithm for Apple Vision Pro level pass-through? Is it cost or else? That is the fundamental purpose of like what we're getting into with this show. The overall theme of our discussion and our overall reporting week to week is exactly how there's a 7x gap in price between the Meta Quest 3 and the Apple Vision Pro. How much is that gap worth to you? How many devices will they ship at this super high price? And how much can Meta improve the $500 pass through to get to the $3,500? Apple has a decade plus lead in developing its own chips, its own silicon, its own way of processing data at the very core level of systems and in computers. That's something Meta is having to partner with companies like Qualcomm to do. And your question there, the answer to it is in how much Meta is able to get from its Qualcomm partnership now in this generation and in the next generation. And we don't know yet. We're on that subject, and we'll have answers for you in the future.
Yeah, these are very big questions, and the only way we will find out is with the release of hardware. I'm just going to answer a question from Daniel Kaz here, which is they're asking, they want a really clear breakdown of what here is speculation and what here is what we know. So we exclusively reported from our sources, that are aware of the situation, that Pico is in fact shifting the content funding from from controllers to hand tracking. So we know that part. That part is what's happening. Pico is shifting its content funding from controllers to hand tracking. The speculation part is that Pico will then, in their next hardware, chase Apple instead of chasing Meta. That's what we're speculating on, to be clear. That's the breakdown between these two things.
And then beyond that, what has been layered on that is, will it be successful? If they do that route, if they go down that route, is it a dead end before it even begins? Is there another route for them to consider near term? Because remember, part of our reporting in that exclusive report is we were invited to a meeting with Pico. And it was clear in the meeting invite from them, they sought information from us rather than providing information about what they were doing to us. And that's not our role. We aren't there to advise Pico on their hardware decisions. We're discussing that with you, our audience, and if Pico wants to listen in, they can.
Okay, the final thing I'll say is just to kind of directly answer that pass-through question. My headset might die in the middle of this. I hope it doesn't, so I'll try to be as quickly as possible. So a lot of people are saying that Quest 3's pass-through is just barely good enough, or some people are saying it's not good enough. The potential for Pico is, what if they ship something that is not $500 but $1,000, and it uses higher quality cameras, it uses higher quality sensors, perhaps it even uses a coprocessor to process pass-through. If Pico basically, with Quest 2, Pico took it and made a Quest 2 on steroids. Pico 4 is a Quest 2.5 or a Quest 2 on steroids. What if Pico makes a Quest 3 on steroids? that instead of focusing on the VR aspect, just goes all in on making the best possible pass-through and hand tracking headset for $700, $800, or $1,000. I do think they have a potential there to do that because Meta, because of its kind of internal mess of shipping new hardware, is sitting there with a Quest Pro that is outdated from its camera pass-through to its chip and will probably not have another Quest Pro for another 2 years. That's a long time for Pico to come in there and deliver something that is somewhere between the vast gulf between the $500 Quest 3 and the $3,500 Vision Pro.
Thank you so much to our discussion, our commenters out there. As always, you're fantastic getting into the very core of these issues and having nuanced discussions. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please hit that like button before you drop off our show today and consider becoming a member. Thank you for supporting our work. Thank you for sticking with us. We'll see you in the future.
Thanks so much, everyone. Again, as Ian said, we really appreciate the quality of discussion. And again, yes, we will see you next week.